Good evening, everyone. Ian Patrick here. And tonight I have a movie for us that was actually recommended by one of my subscribers. Tonight we are watching and reviewing A Letter to Three Wives. It came out in 1949 and it was directed by Joe Mankiewicz. He was also the screenplay writer. In fact, he won Best Director and Screenplay Writer, the Academy Award for both this year for A Letter to Three Wives. And I would classify this film as a drama, somewhat comedy film. I kind of think of it as a chick flick of the day of the 1940s, 1950s, but I'll talk about that later. It was originally supposed to be a letter to five wives. I believe the novel has more wives than just three, but in order for it to fit into a solid hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours, they cut it down to three wives, and I think that was a wise choice. So it stars Jean Crane. She plays one of the wives. She plays Deborah. And we have Linda Darnell, who I really love, and she plays Laura. And we have Ann Southern, who plays Rita. And of the three, I personally like Linda Darnell's character the most. I thought she was the most interesting of the three. We also have Kirk Douglas. He plays George, who is Rita's husband. And we have Jeffrey Lynn, who plays Brad Bishop, who's Jean Crane's husband in it, Deborah's husband. And Paul Douglas, who is quite the character. He plays Porter, who is Linda Darnell's husband. So I watched this film about a month and a half ago, I would say. I'm sort of catching up in reviewing the classic films I've watched this summer. So if my memory is a little fuzzy on it, I'm sorry about that. But I also forgot to show you, I actually watched this on VHS. I really like the cover and the artwork, and that's a Hollywood video, old Hollywood video right there. So like I said earlier, it's sort of like a 1940s 1950s chick flick. Obviously I'm not a girl, so there are probably a lot of things in this movie that I can't exactly relate to in this, but I do think it's a very good movie and definitely worth a watch. It centers on how it is to be a woman or a wife during that time period. There are three stories in one in this film, three stories in the film, from the perspective of each wife. And we sort of see their insecurities as wives and how they deal with it and how they get over it, how they overcome it, how they overcome those insecurities. And it also talks about sort of their flaws and their worries about within their marriage and their failing marriage, and it's told in the fashion of flashbacks. So getting into the plot, this letter is from a mysterious character named Addie Ross. And Addie Ross is sort of the epitome of a woman. She's beautiful, she's smart, she's considerate, she's caring. She's what every man would want as a wife, I guess. And she writes a letter to the three women. They all get the letter, and it basically says that I'm leaving with one of your husbands. And she doesn't say which husband it is, and the women they sort of brush it off at first, like, oh, it's a joke, it's a cruel joke from Addie, she's moving away, and it's nothing to fret about. But then it sort of gets to them, and they start having these flashbacks and thinking, wait, what if it is my husband? And the first story, the first flashback, is Jean Crane's character, Deborah. And I honestly found her story to be the least interesting. I don't want to say boring, because it wasn't boring, but of the three, I definitely saw it as the least interesting. I also liked how the camera, every time we went into a flashback, it was sort of an interesting way, whether with the music or little sound effects. Every time they sort of zone out and remember a bad time that they had with their husband. So Deborah's insecurity is that she wasn't born wealthy into a high class family, and she's not from a high social class, and she feels a little bit insufficient for her husband, who is, I assume, from an upper class family and high society. He's very high respected in his community, and she can't really keep up with his style, that style of being wealthy. And note the dress scene where I think she pulls off of a flower from her dress, and then she has a big hole in her dress when she goes to some fancy dinner party with her husband and Southern's character Rita, and she's really embarrassed by this. But we learn that Addie Ross everyone thought that Addie would end up with her husband one day, that they were considered perfect for each other, and that kind of eats away at her. Maybe I ruined my husband's chance of being with the perfect woman. But I found her husband Brad definitely to be the least likable of the three men in this film. I also thought that he was the most likely to leave with Addie. He's sort of this robot husband, I would say. Just nothing really interesting about him, honestly. He didn't even really show real emotion for Deborah. And whenever she seemed upset, he didn't really pay mind to it. He didn't make her feel better when she was upset. So I didn't really like him. So honestly, I don't blame Gene Crane. I don't blame Deborah for feeling insecure, because that scene where they're at a dinner party, Addie happens to be there, and her husband is just over the moon about seeing Addie there. So I don't blame her for being insecure, honestly. He's kind of, I don't know. Didn't really like the guy. So then we go to Anne Southern character Laura's flashback, and I definitely would say that she had the most likable husband, which was George, played by Kirk Douglas. He was a great guy. He plays a professor, and she is a writer, and she writes ads of some sort for the radio. And she has a very annoying boss who's played by Florence Bates, who she seems to always play that sort of character, real annoying older lady who is you just want her off the screen. And so her flashback is George's birthday, and she actually had forgotten that it was his birthday, and the only reason she remembered it was his birthday was because George gets a package in the mail from Addie Ross, because Addie remembers that it's his birthday, and she gives him a very thoughtful gift of a record of music that George loves. He's just so happy to have this record, and Florence Bates actually ruins that gift for him, unfortunately. So this dinner party there's a dinner party on his birthday also, with her annoying boss there, and you just feel sorry for the guy because it's his birthday and it's sort of ruined because of business that his wife has to do. So it sort of focuses on a wife who she's too tunnel visioned on her job and work, and she doesn't really remember her husband and her family life. She totally forgets it's her husband's birthday, and it sort of fades out after George kind of says to her, I kind of wish you were still the woman that I married. You've changed. You bend over for this annoying boss. You don't stick up for your own beliefs and what you want to write, and that strikes a chord with her. So then we get to the best part of the movie, in my opinion, of Linda Darnell's part, and she also has the most interesting husband. Um, I also think she's the most interesting character in the entire film. She's obviously very beautiful, and she is this beautiful woman, and she's growing up poor, and she lives in a house by the railroad tracks, and I believe that's based on the director Mankiewicz's actual life. I think he actually lived near train tracks, and you can see the rattling of everything when the train goes by, which is a really cool touch. But Linda Darnell, Laura, she's a gold digger. She basically is looking to marry someone of a lot of wealth that can, so she can indulge in all her fantasies in life to, have a lot of money. She has that gold digger mentality. And she basically says, she's going to use her goods to get Porter, played by Paul Douglas. And Paul Douglas is sort of this brute of an older guy. He's been married before, doesn't you get the impression he doesn't really believe in love. And eventually when she's trying to win him over, and she sort of puts on this facade that she's this innocent girl, but he's like, cut the act. I know what you're doing here. And their dynamic is awesome. I really enjoyed watching them. And she also is very seductive with him. You'll see what I mean in the ways she tries to seduce him. And honestly, her seducing would work on me, because I think that Linda Darnell is very beautiful. And note the scene where Porter, he sees Addie and his lights up. He sees he has a picture of Addie on his piano or somewhere in his house, a huge picture of Addie in a beautiful steel frame, or a beautiful frame. And obviously Laura is jealous of that, and that's all she wants. She wants to be worshipped by a man one day, a wealthy man, of course. But his eyes light up whenever he sees Addie. And eventually Porter does cave into Laura's demands that she wants to be married to him. She's not going to do anything with him unless he puts a ring on it. So he caves and he marries her. But you sort of get a sense that he's extremely rude to her. He's a brute. But you kind of get this sense that at the end of the day, he does actually love her. He's just worried that she's just a total gold digger and has no feelings for him. So he's insecure about that. I'm not going to say which husband cheats on his wife. I'll leave it for you all to find out. But I was definitely wrong in my pick. But yes, definitely watch this film. I'm going to give this movie a 3 stars out of 4. It's really clever how you never see Addie. You have an image in your mind of what she looks like, but I really like that they didn't show an actual picture or anything of how Addie looked. I like how the camera work was clever of never showing her. But Addie Ross's voice was actually Celeste Holmes's voice, and it was also just beautiful direction. I could definitely see a lady or a girl giving this movie a higher rating than what I give it, because females can probably relate to the characters more. But I enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed it. I think a 3 out of 4, that's a good score. Definitely worth a watch. So now I will show you, or I'll read to you from my 20th Century Fox book. It says, "It was perhaps the wittiest film made about marriage, It dissects 3 unions and finds them wanting. As 3 wives are about to take a boat trip on the Hudson River, a postman hands each a letter, and it's from Addie. And this causes each wife to reflect in flashback. It evolves that each marriage is salvageable. And it says basically what I said, that he got 2 Oscars, one for script writing and one for direction. And there's a picture of the film of the 3 wives right there. And now we are going to read some very interesting history from, we all know who that is, Linda Darnell, my Linda Darnell book. First, I'll show you a picture. She has a couple pictures, and this is her autobiography. You can see right there. She and Porter at the bottom. Linda's role in A Letter to 3 Wives was easily the best of the trio of leads, which I agree with. It's maybe you all disagree. Let me know in the comments if you disagree or agree. She had risen in Daryl Zanuck's estimation after Forever Amber, and perhaps for the first time he felt that she was a solid gamble in an earthy part. A Letter to 3 Wives was shaping up into a script of quality which Zanuck was confident would also be a good box office. Although Zanuck privately found Joseph Mankiewicz an, quote, arrogant bastard, end quote, he had faith in his genius, both as a writer and as a director. Let's see. Even in the first draft, Laura May, the part Linda played, was viewed as a masterful portrait of hard-boiled, cynical gold digger with a tender heart. Paired with Linda was veteran radio actor Paul Douglas, making his screen debut after a huge success in Broadway. Let's see. The part quickly became Linda's tour de force. Joe Mankiewicz had endeared himself to her early in the production when they were filming a scene in which Laura May eyes a photograph of Addie Ross, the common nemesis of the 3 wives, sitting on a grand piano. To elicit the necessary look of disgust from the actress, Mankiewicz had substituted a portrait of Otto Preminger in a Nazi uniform. Linda thought the prank was hilarious and began to relax with the director, even though she considered him an intellectual, which she clearly wasn't. Much of the outdoor filming on the picture was done on the Hudson, so that Linda was away from home for several weeks, spending most of her time in the East with Gladys Winton. Quote, we were staying in an old hotel in Connecticut, the hairstylist remembered, and our beds were straw. One night, Joe Mankiewicz said, I think we should get away from here. So he, Gladys, Linda, and their makeup man went into New York City by limousine. We had a delightful time, she recalled. We were all just crazy about Mankiewicz. They ate in a marvelous restaurant and caught the Dean Martin Jerry Lewis nightclub act, which was then the rage at the Copacabana. Mankiewicz teased Linda about her southern accent. What do you expect? She told him. Here I've been working on my voice for years, and now I have a maid from New Orleans and a hairdresser from Kentucky. For 9 straight days it rained in New York, forcing work on A Letter to 3 Wives to stop. While the studio fumed about needless expenses, the director waited for the weather to clear. Mankiewicz had developed a reputation as a Pygmalion since his leading ladies invariably seemed to fall in love with him, despite him being a married man. He and Gene Tierney had a romance during the making of Dragonwyck, which I reviewed many years ago, and his affair with Judy Garland had been emotionally wrenching for the unstable singer. Now it was becoming apparent that Linda Darnell had fallen in love with the genius responsible for the best performance of her career, which I don't know if that's true. It is a good performance, but I don't know if it's the best of her career. She talked about him constantly, always full of glowing respect. but her love for him was obvious. Here's a quote. Joe Mankiewicz was a Svengali type of director, said studio executive Howard Koch. He would really get into the soul of somebody, especially women. Joe really hypnotized the ladies. He mesmerized them. They all fell in love with him because he was handsome and a dashing kind of guy. They were awed by his ability, and he controlled them. When the Letter to Three Wives company returned to Los Angeles, Mankiewicz's romance with Linda Darnell was no secret on the 20th Century Fox lot. Their private lunches in their dressing room scarcely escaped notice, and it was soon known around the studio that she was his girl. Friends recognized how deeply in love Linda was, and most of them feared repercussions. Joe Mankiewicz was an interesting and complicated man, the composer David Raskin observed. He looked a lot more innocent than he was. Joe was renowned for ripping off the ladies. One of the girls in the publicity department made a practice of calling Mankiewicz and talking to him at length in a seductive voice just to put him on. Quote, "This very sophisticated man got hooked by this young girl," Raskin continued. "She really ran a number on him. But Joe, I guess you could say, ripped off Miss Darnell. It's astonishing how many of the most beautiful women in Hollywood, the so-called love goddesses, were actually victims who got ripped off by the guys left and right." And here it says, Joe Mankiewicz never talked about Linda, not even to his biographer. Ouch. Except to say that he quote, adored her, and that she was a marvelous girl with very terrifying personal problems. He had a record of persuading women who fell in love with him that they were in serious need of psychiatric treatment. Judy Garland had been one, also Linda Darnell. And I think that's all the history I have. Let me just double check. Yes. So, interesting history behind the picture with the director and Linda Darnell. Really sad for her. She had sort of a tragic life. But going back to the movie, A Letter to Three Wives, definitely worth a watch. I think especially women will really love this movie. Guys too, I like the movie a lot. But the women might give this a higher rating than me. But thank you all for recommending this film to me. And again, guys, you can always recommend films for me to review. I won't get to it right away, but eventually, hopefully I can. And I will see you in the next review.